20 years ago, absolutely not. I was your penultimate public servant working for the federal government, and this would have been possibly a dream if I'd dare to think like this, but definitely I never even went there. All I could think about was, what's my position, what's my job, who do I have to consult with, when do I get my paper done? Completely different world. My career dreams varied, changed over the years. I think I started out wanting very much to help people. I saw myself even as a doctor at one point, but I didn't have the concentration that it takes to get the grades that you need, and I was really disappointed. But you know how in life sometimes you don't get what you want, you get what you need, and that would definitely have been the case for me, because I ended up doing my 20 years penance, as I call it, with the federal government, and learning a lot about how the federal government works. As a result, when they had early departure incentive and I was able to change careers, I had to think about what it was that I was able to do, and I had languages, so I became a translator. I had the lingo, I got to be a translator, I got to work at home. Fast forward, I work at home, surrounded by dogs. And that's how my career evolved in ways that I never could have imagined. I speak 4 languages. I speak my mother tongue, Hungarian, and then I learned English in the street, and I learned French in school, and then I learned Spanish later on. Actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because for the first 5 years of my life, I don't think I was able to speak to anybody because I kept changing environments and changing languages. I spoke Hungarian with my parents, then I was in a street environment, a nursery school, where I had to speak English, but never really feeling comfortable. And then I started French school, and for the first year, I don't think I felt comfortable speaking to anybody. So that I end up, in this day and age, today, in communications, go figure. I was born in Budapest, Hungary, and my parents brought me here in 1956. They came as refugees, and we moved to Montreal. They came with the literal 1 suitcase each, with nothing to their name, just their education and their will to provide a better life for their daughter. And that they did. And they both died before we ended up here, so they really don't know how much everything that they provided for me led to a dream come true, really. I grew up in Montreal. I did go back to Hungary. In fact, my husband and I went back there this year, this past November, and it was an incredible experience to be surrounded by my mother tongue, because since my parents died, I don't hear much Hungarian. And it really did trigger something quite emotional in me. It's important because it's a part of who we are, but it's not a place where we should stop. I'm very much a believer in moving outside the box, in going outside of your safe zone, exploring new things, discovering who we are. I think this world is such a remarkable place now, with all of the internet and social media and the ability for people to communicate with each other across oceans, perhaps someday across space, in fact already across space, as we saw with the astronaut whose name I forget, who was communicating with students here. That is the ultimate dream, for people to discover parts of themselves that they cannot find out about if they just stick to their roots. Beats me, quite frankly. I can't link all the dots. I know that Montreal gave me French. Montreal gave me the freedom to grow up and do whatever I wanted, unjudged, unguided, unrestricted. which is very important, I believe. I came to Saint Pascal, and I have to say that for me, the world of communications and being out in public was never on my radar. It wasn't until we started going to church in Rockland with Jean-François Morin that he asked me one day if I was interested in doing the readings. And I suspect that part of the reason for that was my French, which I learned in Montreal. I was very nervous about agreeing to do it, but I also knew that I couldn't say no to Jean-François. And so I did. And that was my first exposure to being in front of a crowd, speaking, reading, announcing, doing all those things. Brought me out of my safe zone in a way that I wouldn't have thought of doing it, but I couldn't say no. And that's probably the way it's been all along, is that people have asked me to do things, and if I couldn't think of a good reason not to, and I felt that it would help them, then I said yes, and I did it, and wonderful things happened every time. From my father, I got curiosity, and it sounds a little trite in this day and age, but a sense of honor and responsibility, that if you have something to offer, if you've been given gifts, you have to share them, you have to use them for greater benefit. I believe that the tremendous education that I got at great cost to my parents, great sacrifice by my parents, was not so that I could buy myself a bigger car, a bigger house, fancier clothes, more trips. All of that was to be used, and I always had that sense for something greater. I don't mean to sound preachy, but for me it's worked. And I see too many people with great possessions being very unhappy and not feeling that their dreams are fulfilled and never satisfied. And I need to get the message across, because as I have all of these dogs, and the rescue started because the thought was, well, someone's got to do it. As I walk around with all of these dogs, almost 6 years later, I have a lot of time to think about these things, and a lot of gratitude for the things that I have here, which involve work, 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 and more work, and it seems like never ending, and my days can be spent walking the dogs, sometimes breaking up dog fights, sometimes a lot of poop picking up, and a lot of organizing dogs so that they don't bark too loud and annoy the neighbors, which to some people might seem like a dreadful way to spend 24 hours, but to me it's a source of wonder, and I feel growth. And essentially I believe that's what we're all here for, is to grow until the day we die. That is absolutely a problem in this day and age, and it's particularly a problem because it brings up so much, it keeps people from thinking about what's important and appreciating the good things, and makes them too ready to criticize and to be negative. We all see what's going on south of the border. We're all worried about what's going to go on here. And negativity never gets us anywhere. Anger, hatred, never is what human beings are meant to live with. So indeed, we need to talk more, we need to share more, we need to realize that calling people names, cyberbullying, all of those things never do any good for anybody. And I recently had that experience where, sadly, for the very first time in my life, I was attacked and told that I'm hated and I'm doing a terrible job. And although intellectually I always knew how bullying was bad, it was the first time I actually experienced it, and it's worse than bad. It's incredibly painful, and to think that children in schools are going through that. Workers are going through that. It's devastating. It's horrifying. And to me, the answer is better education, more time spent together, more time spent in nature. Well, there was a dog that was in the pound, and Eileen Lake-Wolansky, who was living in Rockland at the time, and Jonathan Roy, who was living in Rockland at the time, he's a teacher at L'Escale, were telling me they met at the dog park and they were talking about this dog and told me about it. And it was, someone's got to do something about it because this dog is going to be put down tomorrow if someone doesn't do something about it. So I looked around and realized, well, if not me, then who? And that's how it started. That's how it started. There were a lot of bumps along the road because although I had dogs and I loved dogs, I was pretty naive about what it takes to bring together a pack of dogs. There were a few dog fights that I broke up. There were a few bruises and scratches and holes in my body, that but I survived them. And after that, it was wonderful to be able to offer this to the community. People came here before the off-leash dog park was opened and came here on Sundays and played with their dogs in the pond. And I also took in dogs to board so that I could pay for the dogs that I rescued, because I do prefer to do these things on my own terms rather than have anybody pay for me or even have fundraisers, which take away funds much needed by much larger rescues with much more responsibilities and fewer resources without these facilities. So it started by chance, and it started with someone's got to do it. Yeah, it's always frightening. Going outside the box is always frightening. Even to this day, I feel so much that I'm out there and exposed. I'm exposed with the dogs. I bring in a dog from the pound and I never really know what I'm going to get. Dogs are very well behaved in the first few hours, in the first few days, and then you don't know really what's going to come. I have to be ready for that. I go on TV, I interview somebody. I don't know what's going to come of that. I don't know if I'm going to do a good job or not, but I know that I go into it with the best of intentions to bring out the best in the dogs, in the person I'm interviewing, and more often than not, it works out. There's a wonderful ad I see on Facebook every now and then about this woman who started up this company, and she attributes it to her father's determination that he encouraged her to fail. Think about it. We are all going to fail at some point, and if there's none of that fear and stigma of being discarded because of failure, then you can fail and then you can succeed. And for kids these days who seem to be so caught up in the need to get their peer approval and be just right in their clothes, be just right in their talk, it's absolutely unnecessary pressure, because when you go at it with your heart and your North Star as your guide, then you're going to end up in the right place after a few bumps. I get the sense of satisfaction that I am saving lives, which it's the same with the trees around here. When we first moved here and we were cutting down trees for our outdoor furnace, I remember there was one tree that I started to cut with the chainsaw, and I couldn't quite get through it, and I was devastated because it was a tree that I had killed for nothing because I couldn't get it down to the ground. It got stuck on other trees. Yeah, I've got a real soft spot for protecting life, but I think that's something that everybody has if they look really deep and they haven't been jaded and ruined by distractions.